Hi everyone. Today's lesson is going to be about the integumentary system. So the integumentary system includes not only our skin, but all of those structures that lie within it. So even on this first slide, you can see that there's a lot of different kinds of structures involved in the skin. We've got our layers of tissue, we've got some hair follicles, you can see some blood supply or capillaries, some adipose tissue, nervous tissue, etc. So we're going to go through each of those and talk a little bit more about them. Again, when we're thinking about the skin, if you hear cutaneous membrane or integument, we're talking about our skin. And so the skin is the largest organ in the body. It is approximately 20 square feet if we were to spread it out. Again, it's made up of several accessory organs in addition to those layers of tissue. So we have a lot going on in the skin more than just at that boundary for us. So when we think about the skin, there are two major regions, the epidermis, which is that most superficial layer. Underneath is the dermis. That's the thickest part that contains all those extra accessory organs. And then underneath at the very bottom is the hypodermis. So it's not technically part of the skin, but it is a layer of adipose tissue that sort of anchors the skin to the rest of the body. So, what are some of our important functions of skin? Well, one of the big ones is protection, right? It is our physical barrier between our internal and external environment. So, it's protecting us against those foreign invaders. It protects us against UV radiation with the melanin pigments in our skin. We also have specific substances in our skin, like the sebum or the oil that's secreted from our oil glands. This sebum is actually acidic, so that sort of deters any bacterial infections on the skin. And then last but not least, deep in our skin, we have these Langerhans cells. So Langerhans cells will phagocytize or essentially eat any of those foreign invaders. They just kind of engulf those bacterial viral cells and just get rid of them and digest it. So protection is a huge function here for skin. It definitely protects us from all of those things trying to get inside. Another big function is regulation of water loss and gain. Our epidermis is completely keratinized cells, so it's that stratified squamous epithelial that is keratinized. So it does form that physical barrier. Also, it assists the urinary system with getting rid of some waste, some nitrogenous waste. It's not as big of a function for our skin or for our sweat glands. The main function for those sweat glands, of course, is to regulate body temperature, but there is some nitrogenous waste removed as well. Another big function is vitamin D production. Vitamin D production is extremely important for maintaining our calcium levels. And so basically, in order to create vitamin D, our skin needs to be exposed to sunlight. And then once it makes vitamin D, it then sends it over to the liver and the kidneys, which can create a hormone called calcitriol. And basically, that hormone helps to keep our bones dense. We don't want our bones to thin out. In some countries where there is not readily, where resources are not readily available, you may end up seeing conditions like rickets in young children. And so here you can see that on the right, the picture with rickets, you can see the legs are bowing. It's literally just the weight of the child that is causing those legs to bow. Now, this does not mean everyone with bow legs has rickets. That's definitely not the same sort of thing. This is specifically undernourished children in those underdeveloped countries. Another big function here is it gathers sensory information. So again, it has that first point of contact with anything outside of the body, right? We've got all sorts of sensors in our skin. We need to feel if something is touching us. We need to feel pressure. We need to feel pain so that we can respond. We need to be able to feel heat so that we can remove our hand or remove our skin so that we are not burning ourselves. And so gathering up all the sensory information, making sure our central nervous system is aware of all of these things, is adding to that layer of protection once more. One of the ones that you're probably most familiar with is helping to regulate body temperature. Again, we have our sweat glands that will sweat when we are overheated. We also have the constriction and dilation of our blood vessels. Again, they're dilated when we're overheated so that blood can get to the skin, that heat can escape, and they are constricted, sorry, or contracted when we are too cold so that we can keep that body heat in. Another important part here is the erector pili muscles that are in our skin. They're attached to each hair follicle. When our hairs stand up or we get goosebumps, it's because those little muscles are contracting. This used to be a feature for humans to maintain body temperature. We had a lot more hair evolutionarily. We've lost that hair, but a lot of other mammals still have it. So, things like dogs, cats, bears, all those really furry animals, those erector pili muscles actually help their hair kind of stand up to hold that body heat in. And so when we think about the erector pili muscles, again, they used to be used for heat loss with humans, but we've kind of lost that through evolution. We've now put other materials like clothes on our bodies, so we don't need that hair to keep us warm. Speaking of temperature control, we need to talk about hyper and hypothermia. Remember, hyper means high, so hyperthermia means the body is too hot. If it stays too hot for too long, it can cause heat exhaustion. Basically, your blood pressure drops so that it can get that blood to the skin. It's trying to get rid of extra heat. You're sweating constantly. You're losing lots of those salts or electrolytes. And if for some reason positive feedback takes over and you do not sweat, heat stroke will set in. So it's extremely important to make sure that we do not put our bodies in those extreme environments. Same thing on the other end, right? If it gets too cold, hypothermia, so hypo means low, then again, uncontrollable shivering at first, trying to warm the body up, but eventually it's going to lead to a slower pulse, maybe even unconsciousness if it's an extended period of time. So maintaining body temperature is extremely important. And thankfully, we have our skin that helps a lot with that. So, when we think about the skin, again, that integument or cutaneous membrane, those terms are going to refer to the skin. So, it's that dry membrane, it's full of keratin, it's that protective boundary. Again, the most superficial is the epidermis. The epidermis is composed of that keratinized stratified squamous epithelial, so lots of layers of those little flat cells, and all of these are full of keratin. The epidermis of our skin is avascular, so there's no blood supply to the epidermis, and so that underlying dermis will actually have blood tissue that can supply the nutrients that are needed. So when we look at those layers, we're looking at the topmost layer first, the epidermis. So that's the most superficial. That's those, excuse me, that's those layers of living cells at the bottom of the epidermis, and then these keratinized cells up at the top. We've got our dermis, which is the thickest portion of our skin, and then the hypodermis, where that adipose tissue is at the bottom. So we'll start with our epidermis. The epidermis has five different strata. All five only exist in thick skin, though. So stratum basale is the most deep layer. Stratum spinosum, excuse me, is a little bit more superficial than stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. So stratum corneum is the most superficial. That's where we've got all the keratinized cells. The stratum lucidum here is in red. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but again, it is only found in areas of really thick skin. So places like the palms of my hand or the soles of my feet. So if I take a look at this diagram, I'm going to start down here at the bottom. We've got our stratum basale. It's just this one layer of live cells that are actively dividing, so actively making new cells. And as these new cells are made, they are pushed upwards. And so as those cells are pushed upwards into the stratum spinosum, they're now going to have those thick bundles of those intermediate filaments, all that pre-keratin material. So they're starting to make lots and lots of protein material. Continues to be pushed up. You can see that these cells are now starting to get much more flattened. And so now that we are ready to push these cells towards the surface, we need to get rid of all that live stuff, all those organelles that were in there. And we need to start really just stuffing these cells full of keratin. And then at this point, those cells are going to die once we have the superficial layer of stratum corneum. All of those cells at the top are completely dead, completely flattened, and completely full of keratin. These are the four layers that we find everywhere in the epidermis. But again, we do have that stratum lucidum that is only in thick skin. So these next couple of slides just go into that detail that was just in that figure. So instead of going through each of these again, I'm just going to skip over to our one that's a bit different. So that's stratum lucidum. Again, it's just deep to stratum corneum. These are still tons of layers of really thick skin, but the through evolution, our bodies have added on this skin in areas of really high friction. So again, things like the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, those things that are constantly undergoing friction with other objects. Um, One other place you may see some thicker skin is on the top of the back as well, between the shoulders, just because there's so much extra UV exposure there. So that is our epidermis. Those five layers are my epidermis. As I continue to move down, we will get into the dermis layer. And so the dermis layer has two parts, the papillary layer. Sorry, I didn't realize that my slide hadn't advanced. The papillary layer, which is towards the top of this, and then the reticular layer, which is a little bit lower. So each of these little humps here is what we call a dermal papillae. And so if you look over to the right-hand side, you see this little bits lifted up. You can see these little humps are little peg-like projections sticking up. Those are the dermal papillae. And so that is why it's called the papillary layer. The rest of it's called the reticular layer because there's so many other accessory organs in here. There's reticular tissue, connective tissue, etc. So with the dermis, again, it's much thicker. It's made mostly of dense, irregular connective tissue, lots of collagen fibers and elastic fibers to provide for stretching and recoil, also to prevent the skin from being torn. Again, it contains those dermal papillae along the top. Those ridges that are formed by those dermal papillae actually form our fingerprints. And so basically, our skin lays in those little ridges based on our genetics, and those different patterns cause our fingerprints, which are used for gripping. Again, the dermis is vascularized. There's plenty of blood supply there, as we saw in that picture. And so we're able to get the nutrients for our epidermis through diffusion. So it can diffuse through those tissues up into the epidermis to provide the oxygen and nutrients that are necessary. But it also does provide our skin color. So when we're overheated, we often turn red. When we are very cold, we often start to turn blue or see some of that cyanosis coloring. So in this figure here, you can see at the top, we've got all those layers of keratinized cells. Our epidermis goes all the way down to this dark area here. This darkest area is that stratum basale. And then this more light pink area is the dermis. Okay, so up here where we've got those humps, again, those little pegs, is our papillary layer. Reticular layer is deeper. And then the hypodermis. Again, it's called subcutaneous. Subcutaneous just means under the skin. It's not technically part of the skin, but we do always mention it because it is a big player in the integumentary system. It's composed of loose connective tissue. It's adipose tissue. Again, adipose we've learned is used for storage of energy, for insulation, so to help with body temperature as well as protective padding, so just soft cushioning, if you will, around those organs that are lower, as well as to provide some fluidity and movement when something touches our skin. So moving on to the appendages of the skin, we'll start with our glands, we'll go into hair and hair follicles, and then we'll end on nails. So with glands, we've got two different types. The first is a sebaceous gland or oil gland, which you probably heard it called. Sebaceous is our anatomical term for it. It secretes sebum, so that is our technical term for the oil that it secretes. When it secretes that oil onto our skin, it helps to lubricate as well as waterproof, so it adds to that waterproofing so that we don't lose water. But it's also, remember, a little bit acidic, so it weakens or kills those bacteria that are on the skin surface. Sometimes these glands can become clogged or infected. It can cause whiteheads, blackheads, acne, that sort of thing. So anytime those get clogged or infected, then we end up with that buildup of the sebum. So that's what causes these whiteheads and blackheads. Second type of gland is sudoriferous, which you guys know better as sweat glands. So sudoriferous is our anatomical term for sweat. There's two different types. There are eccrine sweat glands, which are the most common. These are 90% water that they're secreting. They're the ones that we use for temperature regulation. They're pretty much everywhere on the body. They are also merocrine in nature, so they secrete into a duct, and that duct goes to the surface of our skin. Apocrine glands are a little bit different. They become active at puberty, and they're only found in our armpit or axillary region, and then the anogenital region or the pubic region. And so these specific apocrine glands are associated with the hairs that are in those regions as well. And they secrete a much thicker sort of protein substance. Contains lipids, proteins, and it is something that the bacteria on our skin love to feed on. And so when we start to get body odor, it's because of the bacteria feeding on the material that's secreted by these apocrine glands. So eccrine sweat glands are most common. They cool us down. Apocrine sweat glands only active at puberty, and those are the ones that produce a scent. A couple of modified sweat glands. We've got our mammary glands, which produce milk when a mother is lactating, and then ceruminous glands. So ceruminous glands secrete cerumen, or better known as earwax. So our anatomical word for earwax or is cerumen. So here we've got a hair follicle, a slide of a hair follicle. We've got our sebaceous gland over to the side, so that's going to be secreting that sebum. You can see all these little cells are constantly producing sebum, and then it's going to secrete it into that hair shaft, and that hair shaft will go up to the surface. Speaking of hairs, we have hairs everywhere except for our palms, soles, lips, nipples, and portions of external genitalia. Most of the body hair is really fine. We can't even see it. After puberty, though, there is a noticeable change. Obviously, we get more hair in certain regions, axillary and pelvic regions. Um, Hair growth can happen in different periods. So basically, most of the hairs on our head will grow for 3 to 4 years, and then that hair follicle will die and fall out. Um, However, we do continue to regrow hair. Now, obviously, this rate of losing hair to regrowing does start to slow as we get older, and so it can result in alopecia or hair loss. Hair follicles are formed for those epidermal cells. So those epidermal cells actually line the hair follicle. The hair follicles have a few different parts. Basically, there's the hair root, which is any portion of that hair that is within the follicle, so beneath the skin. And then the hair shaft, which is any of the hair that comes above the skin or above the epidermis. Every hair's got a sebaceous gland attached to it, so that's what keeps the hair lubricated and oily. And then every hair follicle has an erector pili muscle. So again, when those contract, that's what causes those goosebumps on our skin. So here you can see the parts of a hair follicle going down into the skin. Again, anything up here above the skin is the hair shaft. Anything below is the hair root. The whole structure is the hair follicle. We've got our erector pili muscle over to the side here, as well as this sebaceous gland attached. Nails are similar to hair in the sense that they're made of keratin as well. However, nails are made of a harder type of keratin. There's the nail root, so similar terminology, which is the base where it's growing from. The nail body is the actual portion of the nail that you see. Cuticles is that little fold of skin right where the nail hits the skin. That's to help protect that nail body and nail root, sorry. And then the lunula. The lunula is kind of moon shaped, so that's that little light colored area right at the base of the nail that looks almost like a half moon. So if I take a look at our diagram, again, this whole part is the nail body. The root is back here under the skin fold. This little skin fold is the cuticle, and then the lunula you can see is that half moon shaped area. Some general disorders of the skin. Athlete's foot's a pretty common one among athletes. It's a fungal infection. It's usually from changing clothes in a gym locker room, and the floors are maybe not quite as clean as they should be. Impetigo is a bacterial infection. This often gets in through a cut or a scrape or a bite that you already have. Candidiasis is a yeast infection. It's pretty common in moist areas, so areas that stay moist a long time. Eczema is just the irritation or inflammation of the skin. This can happen for a number of reasons. It can happen because of the cold weather outside. It could happen because of stress. It can happen because of contact dermatitis, etc. So when we're talking about the skin, just keep in mind that there are these series of disorders as well. And this is just a couple pictures of those. You can see some of these cold sore lesions that are on the mouth. This is impetigo, so this bacterial infection has gotten in through some kind of open sore. And then this is psoriasis, so another irritation of the skin. Not the last, but one of the last things we need to talk about is skin cancer. So there's three types of skin cancer. Again, some are way more dangerous than others. Benign skin cancers usually stay in place or are excised really easily. Benign tumors don't spread. But malignant cancers are really dangerous. And so malignant tumors will start to spread or metastasize. And so anytime our skin cells are exposed to UV radiation or other cancer-causing agents, it can affect the DNA. And once the DNA is affected, it causes these tumors. So this first one is a basal cell carcinoma. It is affecting those cells in the stratum basale. It's the most common type, also the most survivable type. So these usually stay pretty localized. They're usually removed by excision pretty easily, and most folks make a full recovery. Squamous cell carcinoma is a little more aggressive type of cancer. It's also triggered by excessive UV radiation, and about 1% of these result in death. So it is less common, but more aggressive, meaning that it will spread a little bit quicker. So these can still usually be removed by excision, so just cutting it out or removing it, but they need to be caught early before they start to spread deeper. And then the third and most dangerous type is melanoma. And so with melanoma, we have our way of detecting melanoma early. It's called the ABCDE rule. Most melanoma are going to be malignant. They're going to spread. Oftentimes they have spread before we even realize it. And so anytime you see a spot on your skin that meets these criteria, you should have your dermatologist take a look at it. So if it shows asymmetry, both sides are not the same. If those borders are irregular, so you see it has jagged borders. If the colors are uneven, so you can see a mix of colors in this spot. Diameter greater than 6 millimeters, which is about the size of a pencil eraser. And then if it's evolving, is it changing? Is it growing? Is it raised? Is it changing size, shape, etc.? So again, any of these conditions or any spots on your skin, it's always just a good idea to go to the dermatologist if you can and have them look at it so you make sure you're safe. The last thing in this chapter is about burns. And so with burns, we talk about burns based on the depth of the burn. That's how we classify them. And so first degree burns are a burn of just the epidermis. Usually a mild sunburn is a first degree burn. Only those top couple layers of cells are affected. And so there's no blistering and usually no swelling. A second degree burn goes a little bit deeper into the dermis. So now we've gone through the entire epidermis and onto the dermis. And basically what this causes is it causes the dermis and epidermis to separate, and it allows fluid to build up in that separated cavity. And so that's what causes a blister. So if you see a blister, you know you got a second degree burn. And then third degree burn destroys the entire thickness of the skin. These are often less painful because unfortunately all that nervous tissue in our skin has been destroyed. And so we can't feel pain if we don't have those receptors there. But fluid loss is a big danger here. And so because the entire layer of skin is compromised, we're easily open to invading bacteria, as well as losing lots of fluid and electrolytes. So with these different burns, again, the top picture here, just a mild sunburn, first degree burn. The second one here looks like they might have accidentally touched a hot stove. This is a second degree burn. You can see these blisters here, but the skin is still intact. And then a third degree burn, it is burned all the way through the thickness of the skin. We have different manners to tell if a burn is critical or not. Basically, if the body is covered at least 25% or more in second degree burns, then it's considered critical. If the body is covered 10% or more of third degree burns, then it is considered critical. And then I didn't mention it on the last slide, but if you ever get a fourth degree burn, which means it's burned all the way to the bone, then all of that's going to be critical, no matter how much of the body is covered. Again, major concerns again are fluid loss, heat loss, as well as bacterial infection. And just like with any of our body systems, as we age, things start to change, right? The rate of mitosis decreases, so our skin's not replacing itself as quickly. The dermis becomes a lot thinner, so you'll notice as you age, it's a lot easier to tear the skin. The adipose tissue in that hypodermis decreases, which also causes the skin to tear more easily. The collagen decreases, which causes wrinkles, fewer fibers, loose epidermis, more UV damage continuing to add up, which does cause all of these skin issues later in life. So that's really the end of chapter 5. If you have any questions about anything, please don't hesitate to email me.